This is an event, as you know from your invitations, that's been organized by the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. We've got a variety of speakers that have been lined up to talk to us. The leadership of the institute itself will be having some of the political leaders in the province of Gauteng talking to us. We'll be talking to some of the old hands in property development as well as funding in the country. And we'll also look at the issues facing public and private property ownership in the country. We'll have a panel discussion later on, and we'll also hear from small businesses. All right, let's not delay proceedings, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to get on with a serious business, and the president of the institute is here with us this morning. He's going to give us the welcoming address, Mr. Thomas Tsepo Matlala, who has been who's been a member of this institute for a long time. And he was telling me that the institute itself has grown, more than 100-fold over the past 18 years or so. And he's been involved in business a long time, being one of the founders of companies such as N3 Toll Road Company, ETV, Cell-C. And he comes from the background of law, having worked with lawyers for human rights, and went into property via JHI, Transnet, Ubambo Holdings, and Inani Real Asset Management. And currently he's the director of Material Property Services, and he serves as the president of the South African Black Institute of Property Practitioners. Please give him a warm hand.
When we started our first president, and there was an argument, and I hope the two people involved are not going to be embarrassed. There was an argument as to who was the first president of SAIBPP. And the second president said to the second president, who everyone assumed was the first president, said, "But no, but it was not me." And the first president thought, "No, but I thought it was you." Our first president, Andy Twenty at the time, and he's sitting here, the second row. I'm happy that I hope you're happy that the organization has grown, and where we are. Our second president, Sol Gumere, is a executive director of the Pula Income Fund, and has been a supporter of this organization for a very long time. Quite a number of friends here that have been with us for a long time, and I'm hoping, the reason why we called some of you here is I'm hoping that that AGM is not going to be long, but it's going to be punchy, because we need your ideas going forward. Not your ideas about SAIBPP, but the ideas about property in its entirety. People like Shadrach Mteto sitting here, who has an amazing ideas. One of the things, or some of the things that we did at SAIBPP is, in the early days, we were the first, by the way, to put our members in the then new government of Madiba. And in 2009, when the new minister came and he had the same call, we obliged. And now our members are starting what is called the PMTE in government, which is a government agency that hopefully will manage properties better, because we send them the skill. We were the first to advocate for the formation of the property charter. But it was the second property charter that started. Remember, the first was the mining charter, but the mining charter came from the Minister of Mining at the time. From the property industry, we were the first to say we want a charter like that, because we could see the benefits. We assisted government with the leasing strategy. It had its own problems, and I'll talk about the problems now. But that leasing strategy created, as of Friday, just over 13.8 billion rands worth of wealth listed on the JSE. Now recently we've funded students adverts to do a property course. I'm not going to property accidentally like some of us, because we need to build that core of leadership that is coming up. There may be a number of them that I've missed that SAIBPP has done. And Felicia have already said, while I was sitting there, said to me, "Tsepo, you remember all the things that we've done." Now, 18 years on as SAIBPP and 20 years on as a country, the question is, what do we need? We know that there are two things that we need. We need institutions and we need government. We've got government. What's happening with that institution leg that we need? You know, the interesting thing, and I've said this over and over again, I'm not going to repeat some of the things that I said on radio and in the press releases and in the media, but we've said this country is one of the best policies in the world. In fact, if you go to government at any given point in time, you see their counterparts from Ireland, United States, Malawi, coming to learn about policies that government has. So we have among the best policies in the world. And as SAIBPP was saying, you can have the best policies, but if you can't implement those policies, it means nothing. So the core is implementation. If you can't implement policies, it means nothing. You end up being a talk shop. So you come and you talk, and you go home. And people are still poor, and people's lives don't change. So for us, this, for me, is about implementation. We need to implement what government has instituted.
Do you think the funders fully understand, research, and thoroughly monitor the projects or the people that they fund, considering the high rate of financial mismanagement or corruption within the industry?
There are a range of funders. Perhaps I can talk best about Nature. Nature, we have a combination of skills, which are both financial as well as infrastructural, that is built environment skills. And therefore, when we finance developers and contractors, we take interest on how the contract or the development is managed and take interest on the flow of funds. Because our risk mitigation is about taking care of the flow of funds and making sure that we optimize the funding to the development.
I'm now going to call on one of our speakers and main sponsors of this event, Mr. Marius Muller, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Pareto. And a brief background of Marius. He has been appointed to various roles in the property industry, and his first exposure was as quantity surveyor working as property researcher, investment analyst for Old Mutual Properties, and he joined Kagiso Trust Investments in 2002, getting involved with the listing of Resilient Property Income Fund on the JSE, and he served on their board. He's held executive director positions with a diversified property company, Munyetla, Siatenga, Pangbon, as well as being the managing director of I4 Properties. And in 2010, Marius took up the reins as Chief Executive Officer at Pareto Limited, which is a shopping center owning property company with a market cap in excess of 15 billion rands. Its shopping center portfolio includes Cavendish, Cresta, Menlyn, Mimosa, Pavilion, Sandton City, Southgate, Tiger Valley, and Westgate. They also own Sandton Convention Center, as well as the Sandton Sun and Intercontinental Hotels. He's currently the president of the South African Council of Shopping Centers and also served on the board of directors of the South African Property Owners Association. He's a professional member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and holds both BSc Quantity Surveying and MBA degrees. So please welcome Marius Muller, the Chief Executive Officer, Pareto.
Well, thanks very much for that introduction. I think what Tim did so kindly was talk about my background and some of the things that I've achieved. But really what I want to talk about today is about Pareto, give a little bit of history about us, and not about the company per se, but how we're looking to contribute to society in general, and how we're looking to contribute to the economy and to change. Now, I was looking at the program a little bit earlier, and I saw there's a panel discussion coming up later, split between private sector and public sector. And I see that we are listed under the public sector component there. So just to give a bit of context about Pareto, we are owned by the GPF, the Government Employees Pension Fund. But we're no different in the way that we operate in terms of any other investment that they hold out there. So whether it's a Growth Point, Resilient, or Redefine, or Dipula, so we actually sit in the camp of the private sector. So I'm hoping that when the facilitator looks at the list of panelists, Mr. Jimmy Money, he's not going to say there's way too many private sector contributors here and not enough public sector contributors. So thanks for actually recognizing what I'm talking about. But let me get stuck into what it is that we do as an organization. We're passionate about our people. And when you look at the vision for our company, we own property, we develop, we invest, we manage. But we don't talk about that in our vision. We talk about our people, and we talk about making sure that we can help them to realize their full potential. And so Chepo spoke about government and institutions. And really it's a matter of understanding that an institution doesn't make the difference. Government doesn't make the difference. It's the people within that organization, within that political powerhouse, that brings about the change.
Transformation. What are the current challenges and your solution to those challenges for the powers that be?
I do think that there's room for improvement when it comes to transformation. It has taken place to a large degree. However, for me, what is critical is that government and practitioners as a whole work together in ensuring that processes are more, friendly towards business and particularly private sector. Implementation is key in the sense of government working together with practitioners. In terms of that, there is progress being made, I do believe. However, I do still believe that there's room for improvement on a bigger scale in the sense of private sector working very closely with public sector and ensuring that implementation occurs. Policies are in place, we know what we need to do, but I do believe that we could work together in terms of the relationship, government understanding the private sector and private sector, aligning accordingly to policies and implementing, property policies.
Mr. Sol Gumede. He's the past president of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners and the chairperson of Property Sector Charter Council. He's got 30 years experience in property. So he's transformed himself, as you can see, with the gray hairs. Thank you.
This organization was established in 1996 and registered as a Section 21 company. Those were the people who signed, at that time we used to call it Articles of Association. Andy Tondi, our first president, Zibusiso, the wife of the Minister of, Reserve Bank, and Molly Gallant, I think I saw her, Tsepo Makudu, Lydia, and Robert. When we came together as a group early those years, as you all know, very few of us were involved in the industry. We set ourselves some objectives, and I'm not too sure whether we met all of them. But at that time, as per our constitution, which I think it hasn't materially changed, it was to train and develop primarily black people to be effective participants in the industry. As the president has already said, that we weren't involved in the property for many years, and when this opportunity came, we had to start by developing black people to come into our industry. And to ensure appropriate recruitment, selection, and advancement of black people, Marius has already alluded to it, that even early those years, they couldn't find the black people. They still can't find them today. So it is the duty of the Institute to actually be, when people say that, refer them to the Institute, we will actually give them the black people because the skill is there. To provide career guidance services and facilities to members, including students. We haven't done much on the student side, but as the President has already alluded, we've got some bursaries that the Institute is doing. And to promote awareness of the importance of the property industry for economic advancement and empowerment. And Maria spoke about that. And there are speakers that are coming later in the afternoon who are more qualified to talk about what happened. We also had an objective of creating a dynamic and effective platform for black people. At that time, most property companies were all mutual, Sanlam Properties, Liberty, and Southern Life. And those were the main property company. We find ourselves sitting in those organizations having no black colleagues to talk to. So as black people, we then decided to form this organization.
What do you think should happen to improve the economic opportunities for the marginalized and unemployed youth in the country?
Youth empowerment is a very important aspect of our economy because the youth, I think, is the future of the country. It's very important for the powers that be to focus more on the young. I mean, right now we've got FET colleges that actually most students straight from matric, they go to FETs. I think they need to be given more information and inspiration in terms of what empowerment opportunities are there for them.
Mayor Parkstow, please.
Allow me to join those who this morning congratulated you on organizing this function and conference of black property professionals, and acknowledge, of course, our host, the President of the South African Black Property Practitioners, Tate Matlala, Ratim, representatives of the Black Business Council, and all other organizations present today. Okay, I've got the password in front of me. I thought I should start with an anecdote. Share an anecdote because it would possibly indicate some of the challenges we deal with in government, but also possibly illuminate some of the issues that are critical to the transformation of our city, to the transformation of the industry. And this anecdote relates to a time when, I think it was up until 2008, I served as a member of the mayoral committee responsible for economic development in the city of Johannesburg, and we initiated a program to replace what was then the Better Buildings program, and we titled it the Inner City Property Scheme. And when we designed the Inner City Property Scheme, Oscar says I should speak. Okay. He's taking the speech away. The Inner City Property Scheme were designed because we thought that we had an opportunity to intervene decisively in the inner city in a number of ways, including transforming a city that was experiencing and continues in certain pockets to experience high levels of decay, but one that was also at the same time beginning to see significant levels of rejuvenation. And in this rejuvenation, sought to identify opportunities for black property professionals across the value chain. cognizant that the city, through its predecessors, the Better Buildings Program or the Bad Buildings Program that preceded that, we had transferred a number of properties from the city. Amongst those would have been properties that would have been abandoned. A lot of them would have been in arrears. Some of them would have been sectional title schemes. Some of them would have been owned by property owners who had abandoned the buildings, and a whole range of other buildings. And we're churning out these buildings at almost 2 a month that we would transfer into the hands of new property owners that were beginning to emerge. But we kind of thought that there's something fundamentally wrong in what's happening in the inner city property scheme, because the way in which the buildings are released through the Better Buildings Program does not enable and facilitate transformation of ownership and participation across the entire value chain in the property profession. So we then introduced a moratorium to allow us to redesign the scheme, to enable us to then do the things that we thought are important, which amongst others related to creating a new class of property owners that could begin to participate more meaningfully. And just to summarize what we then designed. We designed a scheme which said that the city would take into its ownership those properties that are abandoned, those properties that are in excessive arrears, and those properties that are not well managed and therefore would need to be expropriated because the property owners were not taking responsibility, including those properties that were hijacked, because we had a significant number of properties in the inner city that were hijacked. And that when we take these buildings, we would then release them to primarily black property owners. And I'm going to explain why, amongst others, why we made it complicated, and maybe sometimes why we ran into a bit of problems. Excuse me. We were also cognizant at the time that government had promulgated the tax incentive. What was it called? There was a UDZ that said that if you own property in the inner city and you renovate it in terms of the UDZ and it's registered with the City of Johannesburg, that you would have a discounted scheme that you could either discount from your taxes, personal and or company taxes, within a period of 7 years. So literally it meant that you wouldn't have to pay tax, at least for the cost that you've invested in your property. And then if you are developing greenfields, it's a completely new property, that the same scheme would apply over a period of 20 years. So government would incentivize the redevelopment of inner city properties. So we were going to take over the buildings and transfer them to black property owners and then say to them, two things. We're not going to charge you rates. We will charge you for lights, but we're not going to charge you property tax up until the date you have completed the renovation and or building of the property and you are ready for occupation. Plus, you would qualify for the urban development zone tax incentive. And the biggest problem we ran into at the time was, so how do we allocate these buildings? Because one, you don't have to pay us up front. You only start paying at the point at which you've got the first lease, because that's how we designed the scheme. So we sell you a building and we say, don't pay us yet. And then when you start paying us, we will make sure that you only start paying when you already have your first lease. And even then, you would qualify for the tax incentive in terms of the UTZ. So this is like, as one prominent black businessman said, it's money for jam. Clearly. It's easy to get in there. All you have to do is to get hold of the property. Because when you have the property, everything will work for you. That's how the scheme was designed. And when we ran into trouble, we then said, how do we adjudicate? And we said, well, the easiest way to adjudicate is to at least force anybody that applies for the scheme to have some financing or guaranteed financing that backs their company. Otherwise, any park star who can come with no business acumen and want to take over a building and do something about it. So at least try and ensure that you limit it to practitioners, to entrepreneurs, and to people who go out there to demonstrate to somebody that this is a viable scheme. And that would be our only measure of discrimination, because criteria is used for purposes of discrimination. Now, why did the scheme fall flat? For a number of reasons. The first is something called the Municipal Finance Management Act that told us that we can't introduce a scheme that allows us to borrow black property professionals' money. So, put crudely, we had written a law as, if I may put it directly, as the African National Congress, that made it extremely difficult to facilitate transformation of the property sector. The second is that for some strange reason, when we introduced the scheme, the properties were being churned out 2 a month. And suddenly, when we introduced the scheme, we could only get properties at a rate of 1 in every 6 months. So for some reason, somebody decided that this machine that rolls out these properties is no longer going to roll out the properties. And it took us almost 5 years to release the first batch of properties that were transferred to black property owners, to be able to take advantage of the scheme, which was modified then to accommodate all sorts of regulatory limitations that were imposed by law. Now, why did I think it would be appropriate to start with this anecdote? Firstly, to suggest that, in fact, there is no lack of will, at least on the part of the city of Johannesburg, to enable access to property ownership and access to transformation of the entire sector. And I should say, the other parts of the scheme included that you will use black practitioners, whether in terms of the rest of the value chain, in renovation, plumbing, tiling, electrical. It was part of the scheme. It would have been compulsory that you use black practitioners along the value chain. And we had gone out as part of this scheme to then say to those in the townships, go and register your companies so that you are able to participate in the scheme. You might come in the first instance at a subcontracting level, but it would be deliberately designed to enable you as you go forward to be able to contract directly. And just so that we make it easier, we established a trust that would own a transitional housing scheme so that if people have to be relocated from current property, they would be relocated into transitional housing, and that we would have financed the transitional housing scheme. So in terms of design, almost everything, I think, at least in my opinion, were done, should have enabled a fast track of the redevelopment of inner city property but not just a regeneration of the inner city. It would have ensured a fast track of ownership and participation throughout the property value chain, ranging from ownership to management to actual construction work, to actual ownership of even the security company would have prescribed. And for some reason, I suspect both within government and certainly reasons imposed by legislation, and no doubt reasons that could be there somewhere within industry. And I'm not going to make any statements that could get me into trouble as to why properties were no longer being churned out at the numbers that they were being churned out in the past. But for some reason, these properties were no longer available. But I suspect to yourselves, as an organization in particular, the question becomes, did we at the appropriate time when we defined and identified such a scheme, form an appropriate partnership with South African black property practitioners to ensure that such a scheme is able to succeed? And I would want to argue that that possibly is where the fault lies. It was in our inability to form a partnership with the appropriate people to ensure the success of the scheme. Now, as I said, the organization that sent me to serve in government at its conferences agrees, amongst others, that it is important that to achieve the objectives of the national liberation struggle, it is important that those who have the most to benefit, that we define as the motive forces of our struggle, are mobilized to be partners in this process of transformation. That it can't be that as you seek to transform a society, that responsibility is left to government alone, but that we have a collective responsibility to work together towards achieving these objectives.
Now, black women in the industry, what are the major challenges that you are facing? And is it still as male-dominated as we are led to believe?
In my view, I still believe property industry is still a male-dominated industry. And I believe there is something that we can do to change that situation. And my focus is mainly at lower levels. It's awareness, education, career guidance. People must not be aware of property and opportunities only at their late stages in life. I do believe if we can go out there whilst youth is still in their high school education, educate them about opportunities as females in the property industry. By the time they make choices to go to tertiary education, they will make the right choices other than them becoming aware of those opportunities when they've already made their choices in life and they cannot go back. If we can go back, educate them, make that awareness that females have a place in the property industry, it will change the situation and females will be equal with males in the industry.
All right, let me call on Nomza Mokhadebe, who's the Managing Director of JHI, and she is going to talk to us about the impact and empowerment of black women in the industry to date.
I come from a humble beginning of a township called Eskaweni Township. It's in KZN, northern KZN. I think a lot of people don't even know where it is on the map, but it's somewhere close to Richards Bay. I come from a family of a widowed mother who in her late 30s was left with the responsibility of growing 2 children who were very young at the time. She was a teacher and has since retired. From an early age, I was taught that this is a tough world and my destiny purely lies in my hands, with the grace of the men above, of course. Historically, in South Africa, black people were denied access to productive land, through the laws and discriminatory policies at the time, black people could not own property, nor could they effectively trade on properties. Due to these laws of the time, this affected the ability of black people to create or accumulate wealth. This has had a fundamental impact on the economic potential of South Africa and black people in particular. Black people continue to be significantly underrepresented in the ownership of property, whilst there are administrative, financial constraints, other legal constraints that are there, continue to restrict the ability of black people to participate in the property market. There is limited participation, as I stand here today, of black people, particularly women, in ownership and control of these property entities. The commercially driven activities surrounding the property, such as asset management, property management, including development, sales, they still rest largely in white hands. The property sector continues to be underrepresented in terms of race and gender. Black women are underrepresented in all the areas that I have mentioned: ownership, control, management, even just in terms of the professional skills that are relevant for the sector. This is the reality of the property industry that we face today. Therein lies the need to continue to prioritize the transformation of the property sector industry. So I thought, let me look at the definition of the words change and look at the definition of transformation. The word change, when I checked it in the dictionary, I realized that it means to take or use another instead of. It sounds very negative, isn't it? In my mind, the word change really can't achieve what we need in our industry. And I believe, to my horror, at times, change is confused with the word transformation. Transformation. When I check the definition of transformation, it says it's a process by which one figure, expression, or function is converted into another one of a similar value. That is what I agree with. That is transformation. In order for us to achieve the transformation that we desperately need, it does require us to have a paradigm shift. There are various property industry organizations, such as SAIBPP, they have really prioritized transformation in their mission statements, their programs, and have even put their money behind these critical initiatives that promote transformation. It is gratifying to witness this. I believe that I have benefited from the efforts of these organizations, and hence I'm standing before you today. There has been a notable change in the transformation of the property industry. However, such progress is just far from material for us to even get into a comfortable zone. I'm pleased to know that there are a few black women in senior management in the property industry. I've also seen quite a few black women today in this room whom I know to have really done very well in the property industry. There is recognition. We have a voice. However, frankly, we're still just a handful and really a drop in the ocean. As it stands, the ripples that we create in the pond just don't spread far enough. We need to continue to see transformation to be a business imperative and a social imperative. It is something that we need to continue to tackle head on and not be afraid to do it. I've also realized, though, that transformation needs a set of rules and targets. The property sector codes are providing us with the rules and definitions and targets, which is great. Although we have these codes, I still believe that we're lacking the enablers of transformation. We need a joint discussion, an industry discussion, to arrive at the set of enablers for transformation. we should not mistake that to be the property sector code or any other code. We need the enablers to be able to get to where we want to go. My experience of driving transformation has been to realize that there needs to be a better understanding of transformation and what it seeks to achieve. People are afraid of transformation. Through fear, at times people will unfortunately cause a blockage in the system. The process does require respect and a lot of empathy. Transformation requires us to be bold, to have the self-confidence to venture forward even when there are so many unknowns in front of us. There is significant value to transformation in the property sector, and I truly believe it brings and continue to bring a lot of opportunities. So I really just want to conclude to say we've made some strides with transformation in our sector, but we've got a long way. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And earlier on, we skipped 2 speakers, and I did not extend their apologies to you. First was the Gauteng ANC chairperson, who's also chairperson of the Appropriations Committee in Parliament, Mr. Paul Mashatile, who could not make it this morning because he had to go to Cape Town for bigger consultations. But he sends his apologies. And the second was Amelia Beatty, who is SAPOA's president. She could not be with us this afternoon because of an incident that occurred at her house. Apparently there was a robbery there, and she was roughed up and currently traumatized. And I think, Tsepo, you have extended your message of goodwill from your organization. So she could not be with us due to that. I'm going to call on the facilitator, Mpoko Nzimande, who is the chairperson of the Gauteng Provincial Progressive Professionals Forum, to please come forward and take the chair there, Madam Chair, who's going to chair the panel. And then we have public sector panelist, Marius Mala, Chief Executive Officer Pareto, Mrs. Ipile Mukari, Chief Executive Officer Motang Investment Holdings. And I'm going to call on Samuel Azasu, Associate Professor of Real Estate, University of Wits, to also join us.
Welcome to the panel, Marius, Ipileng, and Samuel. Today's discussion basically is a topical discussion in terms of where we are 20 years into democracy. These are the discussions that are actually going to take and really reflect in terms of where we are going as a country. So Marius, we are saying time is running out for BBBE code consent. That was the headlines that most of us woke up to last week. Why are you saying time is running out?
Well, I think the reality of it is we've got the generic codes that have been tabled, and that comes into effect 1st of May next year. So the property industry has the opportunity to make sure that we have a current property charter, and that property charter then needs to be reviewed. I don't want to use the term aligned. It's an opportunity to look at what we have done in the past, to see whether it's still appropriate. And we have an opportunity to get that legislated by the 30th of April next year. If we don't revise what we have, and if there's no consensus within the industry, we automatically then default to the codes of good practice from DTI. So time's running out in terms of having our own set of rules for our industry. And if we don't meet the timeline, then we go back to the generic codes. And that's really what we're working against.
Okay. But Ipileng, we are discussing the role basically of public and private sector. Is the codes necessarily the only way in which we should be looking at transforming this particular sector?
Look, thank you, Paul. I think the codes have obviously been very necessary from a legislative point of view. And being, entrepreneurs and professionals in this particular sector, what has become quite clear is that without that legislative environment, you probably would not have had some of the successes and some of the change and the transformation that we have experienced. I think the biggest challenge that we have, Paul, is that codes alone and compliance and tick box checking is just not the basis for transformation. For a South Africa that is transformed to come alive, it's all about intent. And intent from a public sector and private sector point of view, from my perspective, is where it begins. And so when you match intent to compliance, sometimes you get a dysfunctional kind of relationship, because if the intent does not exist, you are not going to be compliant. You will be as compliant as you are required to be. And I think therein lies the challenge for us.
Samuel, Ipileng is highlighting basically what she terms as the challenge or the trust deficit between private and public sector. What is your view on the trust deficit that is occurring between the private and public sector?
Well, what experience, if you look at what happened in Latin America decades ago, was that they made racism illegal. But when you travel across Latin America, you find that they are still extremely stratified. The reason being that passing laws and enacting codes is one thing. Being able to translate these into how people experience everyday life and business is another thing. And as you correctly pointed out, people can become very sophisticated the way they prevent these things from happening. It won't be the old brutish, obvious ways. It becomes a lot more sophisticated. You have a situation where people can actually cleverly check a number of required boxes, but when you step back and look at these things, you realize decision-making authority has never really transitioned from those who previously held it. We just have a lot of cosmetic representation. But if you have a cold look at it, you realize power still resides on one side of the room. Now, when we come in, one of the things we thought is important that would make their concerns materialize is to create a situation where transformation is not only addressing the historical wrongs of yesterday, but also begins to make compelling business sense. And from a university's point of view, one of the things we want to be able to do is, look, if I give these guys Harvard-style education in property, well, you're going to have to do business with these guys if you want to be on top of it. And so, from my point of view, one of the things that needs to happen to make this actually materialize is that we need to grow our skill base aggressively for a number of years to make sure that you don't just check boxes and look at, well, this is the number of blacks we have, and so we have satisfied this cosmetic requirement, but that they're actually there and they're actually participating in decision-making in these businesses.
Is there a mic that we can also get in the audience, because we are still dealing with the legislative framework, basically, with regards to transformation? I hope there's one. So we can also take a question before we move on to the funding elements. I'll just take one question. There's a question here in the front.
Some years ago, we had a commission that brought about what we're discussing today, the codes and compliance and everything else. What was missing at the time when the commission did its work was the promotional element to the outcome of the report. So there was a window, I think, at the time when the late Minister Strauss opened up to this particular sector, especially blacks. Again, we missed an opportunity or putting in a promotional element to this effort. So my question is, given that we've traveled this journey, how are we going to deal with the promotional aspect? Because government can deal with compliance. And I also would urge that we try and forge a partnership with government so that we could own that process of compliance. But promotion should actually be with the sector organizations. Thank you.
Unfortunately, the reality of it is that government is unfortunately not the best partner to unlock these opportunities. They are able to create a framework in which we can make these programs work. But I think the challenge comes in when government wants to be involved with actualizing what we're trying to do.
My name is Bonolo Ramokhele, and I'm an executive director at Leo Fortis Group. And mine is actually, because I'm a novice, I'm very naive, I know nothing. So when I'm in a room full of people who know, I'm just going to ask an open-ended question of a problem that we've been having. And hopefully somebody after the session can actually come through and give us a bit of light. But when entrepreneurial business, and to build an asset base, we looked at property. We thought that's the only way you can actually build an asset base so that we can be able to do the other interesting things we do. And we secured land 80 kilometers north of Pretoria to develop a shopping center, servicing 240,000 people who travel about 40 kilometers to go to their groceries currently. So secured the land. We've got an anchor tenant who's interested to get on board, which is ShopRite and Pepco. And we've got the community on board with 10% of the project as the trust. But my biggest problem is that we are bootstrapping everything, paying for the professional fees and so forth. And what we found is that it's actually cost a lot of money to get to the first brick being laid. We thought that the biggest thing was getting a loan from a net bank, whatever it is, to actually do the actual building. When you find that like a simple drawing can cost you 6 million rands. So how do you actually get
like
from the concept stage, because of the fact that the business side of things makes sense? I'm a CA by profession, so I know nothing about property, but I know a bit about getting a business off the ground. But the property one seems to be stumping us quite a bit. Thank you.
I'm going to talk from my own experience and say that, you know, there might be a number of developers in the room, and what you probably would find is that they have been developing this in this space for many years. Developments require deep pockets. It's not an area that in my own experience, it's not an area that has been highly successful. It has been successful where we have partnered either with bigger players and or government. And I think, you know, really to be very constructive and honest is that the experience I've had is that you rather build the annuity base from a services point of view and then slowly but surely get into the ownership element and then developments. That being said, it does not, you know, I'm not suggesting that it cannot be done. I think the comment you've just made that there is such a massive requirement, the actual pre-development stage there's such a massive requirement for capital. And this is where I really believe new entrants like yourselves should look at a number of options. You know, you could be looking at a partnership with somebody who actually has the deep pockets, and that allows you to make some mistakes, but actually get the actual development up and going.
My name is Welcome Mashinini from DTS. We're a consulting firm. I just want to put a challenge together with a question to the panel. The challenge is the ownership of property is not a reality for a lot of people. And I think the stats on the listed funds are reflective of that. So I think we need to accept to a certain degree that we're not going to get the kind of ownership at this point that we desire. We need to work towards it, but we need to appreciate that it's not happening right now. And I think part of where we need to intervene as as people in the property industry is that there is a lot of consulting businesses that are not getting the kind of airtime they should be. So there's the level of, there's the layer of ownership, and then there's a layer of the services, the value chain that was spoken about earlier by the Honorable Mayor. So in that value chain, there's still a lot of transformation that needs to happen, which is not happening. So I'd like to put it to the panel to get your views on what you think can be done in that space, so that we don't just deal with the ownership, we also deal with the rest of the industry. Thanks.
We need to be very careful about the fetish of ownership.
I like that.
Because it doesn't always make economic sense to own property. Sometimes it makes better sense to rent. I mean, we could take that discussion offline. Sometimes it makes sense to rent. Sometimes it makes sense to own. And ownership is not always a good economic decision. And I'm not persuaded that you need to own your own house in order to move on to do all kinds of businesses in the property sector. What I do think you can do is to find what are the low-hanging fruits in terms of business services that you can provide, which is where government comes in, where government begins to say, okay, X number of our business per year will be given to a number of small-time operators. So if we need valuation services, we'll approach black-owned small businesses. If we need property management services, we'll approach small black-owned businesses.
In conclusion, the topic of the day is about black industrialists. Do we see PDEs in this property sector as being black industrialists? Is there a future for industrialists, for large-scale participants in this sector? We'll start with Samuel.
Sure, I think that is going to happen. I'm not able to forecast how quickly that will happen. But I think also that one thing that we need to have in mind going there is that if we sell diversity only as an issue of addressing the wrongs of yesteryear, we get bogged down by politics. But if we sell diversity as a source of innovative new ideas, promoting a culture of new solutions to ongoing problems, we probably might be able to go around some of the constraints Marius has highlighted. Beyond that, I'm extremely confident that it is only a matter of time. You will see structural shifts in the industry. But as she advised, a lot of us are going to have to start small in order to get there.
Small, Ipile.
No, look, I mean, your question around black industrialists, I think it is a long-term ideal that needs a real catalyst or real facilitation from public sector. It's the only way, in my view, that it can happen. As it is, if you look at our private sector, the size of the private sector, the size of the listed market, it is certainly far below the size of public sector. And to create those industrialists, there needs to be a meeting of the minds at that level between public sector and black practitioners or black aspirant industrialists.
Thank you.
So maybe a closing comment from my side is we've said a lot. And maybe the question is directed to SAIBPP is, so what? Okay, we've shared ideas, and the question is, so what? And I think that's maybe the question that SAIBPP we need to ask ourselves is, what happens from here? Is the matter of diluting what's there, or is the matter of transforming business as it is? SAIBPP's role in my mind is one of being a watchdog and being a conscience of what's happening out there and communicating it and putting it out in the public domain. I'll give you one example where I think it's a particular bone that you should pick up and run with, because we had an engagement with the municipality of Cape Town, and they showed us all of their plans for how they manage their properties and so forth. And the question that I asked at the end of the day was, what's your transformation plan? And they said, we don't have one. And I said, but why not?
They don't need one. Not even have.
They said, well, you see, in terms of the procurement policy, it's required of us to do that. But in terms of the municipal asset transfer regulations of 2008, we don't have to. Okay.
Yep.
Now, for me, that comes back to that first word, intent. And so your role is to say, well, what's the intent? The transformation there, it would seem, comes from legislation. That's the motivator. And there was a gap, and so that took the gap. But I think the question for me in the closing comment, Tsepa, to you and the team, is after all of this, so what? What are you going to do about it?
Thank you.
My presentation is broken down into 3 parts. I'll basically just give some color onto the listed property sector, how it has been previously constituted, how it is constituted currently, and what are the recent developments in the listed property sector. And I'll briefly talk through what economic challenges we are facing currently in the broader economy, but more specifically into the listed property sector and the property sector in general. And I'll just sort of give you some numbers in terms of what we've seen, recent developments as far as BEE companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The current environment as it is, previously the listed property was constituted by property unit trusts, which were governed by the Financial Services Board. They created onerous legal structures. Their incorporation required that you should have a MANCO, a management company, an external management company. And what that meant is that you had a situation where you had a listed property company and an external management company who have totally separate shareholders. That in itself created perceived conflict of interest, because ordinarily the promoters or the MANCO shareholders are remunerated on the basis of charging a fee, call it a market cap plus debt, in order to get their fees. But that in itself created a conflict of interest, because all of a sudden the managers will try and grow the fund purely for the sake of getting a higher fee, because they really do not have to worry about the quality. The second option that you could access through the JSE was through a property loan stock, and I see Pareto is still an unlisted property loan stock, one of the only remaining ones. But all the ones on the JSE have now moved into being a property loan stock. They are governed by the Companies Act, pretty much the same as all the other normal JSE companies, but they also had a flaw in a sense that they had a linked structure where your ordinary share was made up of a debenture and an ordinary share. So it really did not make sense. It made it very difficult for international investors to understand our structure. And last year, to formalize and harmonize the industry, REITs were introduced, being the Real Estate Investment Trust. This is a globally accepted legal structure. It's operational in the UK, Australia, and the US, and it makes a lot more sense for international investors to understand the structure. And since its promulgation, we have seen a lot of foreign interest coming through into our listed property sector. Of the big two, Redefine and Growth Point, the foreign shareholding is close to 20%, whereas on the smaller ones it's between 8 and 12%. But that is expected to grow as more and more of those international investors understand and become quite comfortable with our structure. It must also be noted that when you look at the JSE overall, the foreign shareholding is close to 40%. So we still have a long way to go, but I think this recent development surely is going a long way in addressing some of those issues. Another recent development in our sector has been development companies. We had a first development company listed being Attack. Attack, they own development properties. One of their larger ones is the Waterfall Mall, where they are currently building a 110,000 square meter shopping center, and that will be one of the biggest. In fact, just behind us here, there's a new town junction where they've also built a shopping center and also built a regional head office for Nedbank. As part of the evolution of our sector, we have seen offshore listed property companies having primary listing onto our board. As an example, we have a company called New Europe Property Investments, predominantly in Romania. The asset base is predominantly in Romania, but they are also expanding within the Eastern Bloc. They are looking at Serbia and Slovakia. And you can access this kind of opportunities through the JSC without really incurring a lot of other costs, just purely trading the shares on the JSC. There are other variations. There is a company called Redefine International with interest across Germany, interest in central London and mostly in hotels, and also in government tenanted offices in the UK. And you also have other legs where there are other companies operating in Australia. We've got a company called Investec Australia. We've got Growth Point Australia, which is a pure subsidiary of Growth Point. And we also have other companies that you can have access through that have quite a very nice offshore. And by its nature, it's a rand hedge. So it really does protect you against the depreciation of the rand. The listed property sector in 2002 was only about 14 billion. It was not really a force to be reckoned with. It was a very small sector. It was not considered a standalone asset class. I actually don't playing around with it. But of late, we have seen there is institutional interest into the sector. We have seen the larger, bigger pension funds, they are now allocating more and more money into standalone property allocation. Through that, we've seen the market cap of the sector grow from a mere 14 billion in 2002 and is currently sitting at about 320 billion. And if you add all the other counters that don't necessarily have only South African presence, but they are also listed on other exchanges, then we're looking at a market cap of close to 420 billion. So it is quite a substantial sector. And I think the one thing you must know, just keep that 320 billion market cap number, because we're going to refer it back. We're going to refer to it back when we look at what's the share of the BE players out of that 420.
A good friend of mine, and he's going to talk to us about the current state of affairs and the relevance of race-based industry associations. He's a Black Business Council General Secretary and a veteran of the economic struggle, Xolani Qubeka.
I just think we're in trouble in this country. You see, because there are a number of schemes that have been set up by government. The challenge that I have is that when the ANC government came into power, they actually inherited an apartheid economy. And there have been a number of strategies that government put in place to try and make it work. But unfortunately, it is very difficult because this economy is really entrenched in white hands, in white capital. And as a government, we needed to do something different. And the problem that we have is that from a government perspective, whilst we have all these wonderful regulations and laws. We have not been bold, in trying to sort of change the game, as it were, because we have been very shy, I think, to deal with the issue. Even the phrases that we used, previously disadvantaged people, instead of saying black people, we're trying to place equity in the majority of black people in this country who have been hitherto disadvantaged and dispossessed. And then we throw terms like radical economic transformation, but there is no strategy in terms of what does that mean. On the 24th, which is about 2 weeks back, we had the Presidential Business Working Group, which is BBC, BUSA, government with cabinet ministers. Now, in one of the reports, one of the deputy ministers, in trying to show that there are projects that are aimed, for instance, at building local economy, and in particular to revitalize township economy. Now, in the slide there, it says government has put a government fund of 50 million rands to revitalize black townships. So when it was about time for us to engage, I then stood up. I said, Mr. President, I'm very concerned, you see, because if we talk about radical economic transformation, if we understand that the Johannesburg Stock Exchange market capitalization is in excess of 3 trillion rands, and then we're talking about a government fund of 50 million rands, I'm not sure how serious are we. Is that part of perhaps the radical economic transformation? And I said, we need to be bold as government. We need to do things differently if we're saying there's a radical economic transformation. And there are lessons to be learned. In 1948, when the National Party took over, Afrikaners occupied just over 2% of the economy, and it was mostly in the agriculture sector. And the National Party had to deal with the poor Afrikaner problem, as well as literacy and semi-literacy problem of Afrikaners. And they had to do certain things to make sure that they can reposition Afrikaners in a place of pride in their new dispensation. One of the things, obviously, that they do in terms of job reservation, they introduced job reservation precisely because they wanted then to reserve jobs for Afrikaner. And the National Party then utilized the state resources and the state power to empower Afrikaners in a very, very deliberate manner. And they didn't have all these schemes that we have. They didn't have white economic empowerment, because the problem with us is that when you talk about these things, nothing happened. They just knew that they have a mandate from the voters to make sure that they can empower their people. And therefore, they created democratic institutions that were placed to make sure that they can empower Afrikaners. I think today, Afrikaners in the economy, I think they are almost in excess of 60%, because there was a deliberate strategy to make sure that we can empower white people. Obviously, they work with government. They established the IDC, which in fact, the IDC came as a result of a proposal by 2 Afrikaner professors from Vereeniging, who said to government, we need to set up an institution that will mobilize resources that we will use to empower Afrikaners. When I joined Denel, I think it was in 1993, they gave me all sorts of forms. And I was at an executive management level, but they gave me all sorts of forms. The one form was of Allied Bank, so that I can fill it. They will open a bank account from Allied Bank, which is an Afrikaner bank. They gave me an insurance for my car. I had insurance, but no, it would be cheaper. But they gave me a Sanlam. In fact, it was a Santam form. and a number of other forms which were created to make sure that you do not decide where you want to bank, but you bank with those African. But what did they do? They created what I would call white hegemony. They created institutions that would make sure that they capacitate Afrikaners, and they were not shy about it. The same IDC today that is more stringent than most of the banks. And therefore, whilst a lot has changed, but practically nothing has changed. Yes, we have produced a number of wealthy black people. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that, yes, we have changed lives of individuals, but we have not changed the game. So it is important for us to be able to say, what is it that we do? If we are saying there's radical economic transformation, what is it that we do? Because we must demonstrate that indeed these are game-changing mechanisms that we need to put in place. We need to also be able to even to change attitudes. Because one fundamental issue that we have, both even from black business, even from government employees, is the attitudes. I will recall in Gauteng, I think in Gauteng province, probably around 1996, when I was trying to get a 2 million IT tender. And I went to this chief director, and I sat with him, and this guy said, "Chief, I see you want 2 million rands worth of contractors here. Alone, what are you going to do with it?" I'm being honest, he's a chief director. He said, "What is it that I'm going to do with these 2 million rands?" You know? Now, when we talk about radical economic transformation, when we talk about economic transformation in general, we need to do things differently. We need to be able to say, what are those things that we need to do differently to make sure that we can empower black people?
Keith Coates is going to talk to us about South Africa today and tomorrow. Where to from here? The next 20 years of the growth spurt. And from his presentation, I hope we will take stuff and then use it to strategize for the kind of country, nation, and system that we want for ourselves. Keith Coates.
I just want to bring a very high-level overture, if you like, to you about our country and maybe help motivate what could be done, what questions we should be asking, etc. We understand that we're a country dominated by the press, and just this morning, the 3 newspapers I picked up on my way here didn't make for good reading. The Star, Sanrail is broke. Hijacked victim thrown from car. He later died. That was in Durban. Eskom in disarray and threatens region. And as Mark Twain said, if we don't read the newspapers, we uninformed. But sometimes if we do read our current press, we're misinformed. And so how do we get beyond the headlines? The headlines are valid. There's stories behind those we can't afford to ignore, we have to pay attention to. But when they come at you day after day after day, it's so hard to step back and get a different kind of perspective. And that's what I'm hoping I can leave you with today. Stories matter. My title in Tomorrow Today, the consultancy I'm part of, is the Director of Storytelling. And as I work cross-culturally in the world, I've discovered that the one thing that all of humanity has in common is story. If you want to bring people together, you share story. We understand story in Africa very well, but it's not only peculiar to African culture and society. If I were to meet you for the first time at a cocktail party and go up to you and shake your hand and introduce myself and say the first question out of my mouth, "Hi, what are the 7 irrefutable truths by which you live your life?" You'd probably run a mile and warn the rest of your colleagues, don't get caught with that lunatic. If you see him coming towards you, get out of there. We don't start our conversations like that. We start our conversations around story. Tell me a bit about yourself. What's your family? Who's your family? Flying up from Durban, I was with all the Kaizer Chiefs players. I'm a Orlando Pirates fan, so I asked them to go very easy on my team. Thank you. But I don't have good news for you. They assured me they would not go easy on my team this season. But we start with story, with sport, with allegiances, with family. And stories matter because when we step back and look at a South African story, story provides context, it provides content, it provides coherency. And so somehow we are all conveyors of a South African story. I'm not sure anyone can tell this South African story. It is so complicated. But we all have a South African story. And as we get to find ways to share that and live it, I have hope for the future. The point is stories matter. And our unfolding story and where we are in our current history matters. And we all have a part to play regardless of where we've come from. But we know the South African story has been blighted by something that we can't easily move away from. This wonderful land that has this kind of biodiversity that is second to none in the world. We stand in a tip of Africa, and once somebody said it's as if God, in making the world, poured out all the riches out of proportion into the tip of Africa. We have biodiversity. We have an incredible array of bird life and richness when it comes to that. In terms of our fauna and flora, again, disproportionate the wealth we have in this little tip of Africa when you compare it to the globe. When you look at our mineral capacity, and of course the opportunity that gives us to turn that into manufacturing and to grow our economy, but again, a disproportionate proportion of mineral wealth. And then of course our people. And South Africa is about our people and the diversity that we have in our people and the richness of our people and all of those things and how they've contributed to getting past something that very few countries could ever have got past. And let me show you this clip as a perspective of where we've come from and the misinformation and how things were teed up.
Ek is 'n Afrikaner. My verhaal is die verhaal van 'n nuwe volk.
The election of 1948 brought the Afrikaner nationalists to power. They set up a political system which enshrined in law the racism that had long been common practice. Separate entrances, separate seats, separate lives.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
And we know how that worked out, don't we? A South African story. And you see, the truth is that until the lions have their own storytellers, tales of the hunt will always favor the hunter. And so today, you and we, and together we need to redress the imbalances that were ruthlessly put in place over 40 plus years. And we need to emerge with a society where maybe there's no need for a black forum like this, or a white this, or a color this, where there's a South African forum. And I hope and pray that we will get to that place one day in South Africa. But right now, again, there are massive imbalances that need to be addressed. And so who gets to tell the story? Well, again, the reality is we all share a story, and I'm going to share a story, a perspective. I'm not an economist, and I don't pretend to be an economist, but I want to share some aspects of our economy and some facts and figures that, again, will help give us this perspective. I tend to play in the world of futures, and futurists talk about 4 ways the future can unfold. The one way is through continuations, incremental steps into the future. The second way is through collapse. Things fall down. Look at what's happened in Europe with Greece, with Ireland, etc., economic collapse, and things change as a result of collapse. By the way, that was the prediction by most external people as to our future as South Africans. It would collapse and it would be chaos as a result. There's a disciplined approach where you take a very disciplined approach, and similar to that is transformation. And I think the reality of change is that it often involves all of those things. Often when I work in the corporate sector and I ask, what do you envisage your future? Which one of those 4 areas will dominate shaping your future? Very seldom do people put up their hands for collapse. That would take, it might be political suicide or career suicide. But the reality is we know that there are certain industries and companies where collapse is the future. And corporate history teaches us that in the past. Kodak, The inability to change their business model meant that when the digital arrived, one of the world's largest company, a company with $31 billion, was obliterated almost overnight. And their failure was not to fail to see digital. They saw digital. They helped lead the charge. Their inability was one that couldn't change their business model. Their slogan was, you press the button and we'll do the rest. And their corporate business model was built on, we do the rest. And that's the part that fell away when digital arrived. So all of those 4 areas play a part in our unfolding future. And obviously we'd want it to be transformation. Futurists also talk about 3 ways the future happens. Continuations I've explained, economic, political, and social cycles, or novelty. In the language of a futurist, novelty is the curveball, the 9/11, the thing that very few people could predict or foresee. 5 years ago, futurists believed that our future would unfold very much like that. In other words, it would be dominated by continuous steps into the future, more of the same with incremental change. Current thinking amongst futurists has turned that table on its head. These are people whose discipline it is to help us understand the future. Now, the reality is we are building a South Africa in a global context that looks like that, where our future will be shaped by things that we can't foresee, we can't predict, or we can't control. And the response to that, be it a corporate culture, be it a national culture, is one that is agile and nimble and quick and responsive. And if we don't build that, regardless of the richness of our heritage and the wonderful miracle, as some call it, of the South African story, we will not survive the future. This document is a goldmine. Instituted in 2007, when Trevor Manuel became Minister of Planning, it started to gain momentum. A 25-team task force was put together. Cyril Ramaphosa was the vice chair of that. It was approved recently at the ANC conference. This is a blueprint for our economic growth rate to the year 2030. Is it flawless? Of course not. Has it been universally adopted and accepted? Absolutely not. But that's signs of a good democracy, that it can be challenged. And it is being challenged, and it is not flawless. But it's a wonderful piece of future-forward thinking in order to say, where do we need to be in 2030? Not many countries have this. And the fact that it has been floated past, the fact that in one of the early draft forms when it came out it was openly critical and it was seriously entertained and we could make those critiques, is a wonderful tick for our democracy and our ability to think critically and have transparency and open debate. Do you know South Africa in the international transparency rating, we rate, when you look at the BRICS countries, we rate highest with Brazil, 69. China's next at 80, India's rated 94, and Russia, not surprisingly, 133. I do work in Russia as well, and I don't want to tell you stories about that. But that's encouraging. When it comes to transparency, we are the highest rated BRICS country, and we ought to take pride in that, we ought to guard it, and we ought to understand the importance of that in our society. So we have some serious headwinds that we need to deal with. We really do. But we always focus on the headwinds. I want to say, let's look at the tailwinds. We've got some wonderful tailwinds, and we need to focus on the tailwinds as we make our way into the future.
It's been a very long day, and I would like to thank all the speakers, the panelists, and the facilitator earlier on, the organizers of the event. You did a superb job. The technicians, everybody who worked on the project up to so far. The decor was superb, the gifts, fantastic, everything in order. The sponsors, we appreciate. And of course, yourselves for bearing with us and spending the whole day here. Thank you very much, and good luck to you. Thanks very much.
The South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners presents Isitwalandwe Awards. Ladies and gentlemen, the awards are conferred in honor and recognition of outstanding individuals whose pioneering work and dedication has urged the transformation of the South African property sector. She is currently the consultant CEO of the Property Sector Charter Council, the organization that is entrusted with developing the strategy and programs that become an enabler for the stakeholders of the property sector to achieve transformation in the property sector. I present to you Portia Tau Sekati. A 20-year track record in property management and development make him the ideal candidate to steer Liberty Properties' current developments and aggressively seek third-party mandates, ensuring the company retains its position of strength in South Africa and beyond its borders. Ladies and gentlemen, Maurice Mdlolo, Managing Director, Liberty Properties. Executive Director of Landmark Real Estate Services Pty Limited, a company established almost 15 years ago as one of the first BEE real estate companies specializing in retail and commercial development in previously disadvantaged areas and small towns nationally. Please welcome Lionel Kirsten. She joined the Liberty Group in 2007 and is now with Stanlib's Direct Property Investments franchise. She is currently asset manager for Stanlib Africa Direct Property Development Fund since January 2014. She is involved in a number of industry bodies and is past president of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, SAIBPP. Khawkhelo Mamabulu. And she was appointed as the executive manager for the International Business Unit in April 2012. She is responsible for coordinating and growing TFR activities and increasing operational efficiencies in the African region. This is intended to increase our volume growth and Transnet's efforts to extend operational footprints in the region. Nyameka Madikizela. He is the current president of the South African Council of Shopping Centres and also serves on the board of directors of the South African Property Owners Association. He is a professional member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Since 1993, Marius has functioned in various roles in the property industry. Marius H. Muller. With almost 30 years' experience in property, he has all the credentials to lead this ambitious property group forward to its next zenith. A career highlight was managing the Johannesburg office of Old Mutual Properties, a portfolio valued at 3.2 billion rand. He is past president of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, SAIBPP, and past vice president of SAPOA. Sol Gumede, CPM, Dijalo Property Group CEO. A seasoned property development professional with more than 26 years in the property industry. Joining Old Mutual Properties in 1987 as a property manager, Dijalo's major project was the 876 million rand MTN head office in Constantia Kloof, with a view of developing various retail, commercial and industrial projects. Hosea Malekane, CPM, Managing Director, Dijalo Property Development. He is a founder member of the South African Institute of Black Property Professionals and was instrumental in the drafting and gazetting of the Property Charter as the chairperson of the steering committee. Litlokonolo Andy Tondi. He has previously, over the period of time, been director and co-founder of Malatin Tene Libertrau, director of Faro Lane Tene, Johannesburg, and resident partner at Faro Lane, operating as Roos Lane Tene, Maseru Lesotho, Hatlan Tene. His career started at JHI as a property manager and later a broker. He then became the assistant regional manager for Transnet Properties in charge of 4 provinces, namely Gauteng North, Mpumalanga, Limpopo and Northwest. He was later part of a team that initiated the N3 Toll Road Company and sat on its board. Tsepo Matlala. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Buna Group. He is a visionary extraordinaire. In his distinctive career, he has managed a diversified commercial property portfolio worth more than 60 billion rand and has been involved in 80% of South Africa's super regional shopping centers. Caswell Ramperi. A resilient entrepreneur started a construction company, Afcon, specializing in the construction of upmarket homes. The focal point of the business changed from pure construction to property development, and in 1997, the vision of Billion Group was conceived. Sisa is the driving visionary of the Billion Group and an ardent entrepreneur. He listed the first black managed property fund, Sisa Ngebulana.
South Africa marks 20 years of democracy this year, but perhaps more significantly, South Africa marks the 101st year since the passing of the 1913 Land Act. 101 years on, we continue as a country and as a people to reflect on what is arguably the most influential act passed in the history of South Africa, and the role that it has played in the foundation to allow subsequent laws to take traction in our society, the society we live in today. More significantly, for us as practitioners in the property industry, we reflect on the passing of the Act and on its impact on the national psyche of South Africa, on the impact of our ability to participate fairly in this economy, on its impact on infrastructure and developmental inequalities that continue to exist today. These are painful and often difficult conversations that we must have, but conversations we will have. If ever you seek the deepest cracks in the soul of a man, a nation, and his people, search first in the annals of the history of the land and of its ancestors, and there you will find either a tale of glory or a tale of dispossession and despair. Of all the processes which have brought about the inequitable distribution of wealth and power that characterize South Africa today, none has been more decisive or more important to most black South Africans than the dispossession of land. 20 years into a democratic South Africa, in spite of an enabling constitution, policy, and laws, the issue of the ownership of land and property in our country remains a deeply emotive, divisive, often uncharted, and complex territory, driven between a rock and a hard place, as the chants of land, land, land permeate from our stadiums, from our rallies, from our communities, but perhaps most importantly, from the most primal, the most conscious parts of our minds as we all seek this very basic freedom. The question we must ask ourselves as a property sector this evening perhaps is, if we are free, how free are we? I would like this evening to acknowledge the presence of the following individuals at the dinner tonight. To Ms. Amelia Beatty, who is the president of SAPOA, Xolani Qhubeka, here tonight as the Secretary General of the Black Business Council, Mr. Mxolisi Zwane, the President of FABCOS, Babalwa Ngonyama, who serves as the CEO of the Black Business Council, as well as Ms. Portia Tausekati, who is the CEO of the Property Sector Charter Council. A huge thank you to the 12 phenomenal industry heavyweights from the public and private sector that we heard from earlier today. Not only did they deliver insights, they responded to some hard questions, but most importantly, they have driven us to action. Not just intent, but action within the roles that we hold in the various institutions that we lead as well as own. And we thank them for their contributions to this incredibly important conversation tonight. An evening such as this, as beautiful as this, is not possible without special friends in the industry. I will not call them sponsors, but I will call them friends and partners of an incredibly important organization called SAIBPP. And yes, you may give them a round of applause. To Pareto Limited as our main sponsor this evening, Prime Media Unlimited, Dijalo Group, Guma Group, Area Projects, as well as the Airports Company of South Africa. Thank you for making this day and SAIBPP possible today. So, South Africa, we're 20 years in. The definitive buzzwords for today: transformation, engagement, action, access. Yindele ndlela esisazoyihamba as a property sector in South Africa. But here's the thing. We've come so far, brilliantly in our individual endeavors as well as within the sector, but yet we have so far to go. So what and who is taking us into the next 20 years? What are they armed with? Are they armed with our history? Are they armed with the potential of our future, not just as an industry, but as a country? SAIBPP is passionate about leadership as well as entrepreneurship in the property sector. And based on those principles, we will continue to operate in the property sector, unveiling new opportunities, facing the challenges that this sector faces head on, both in equal measure and with great energy. Now, the one thing I did not do before I launched into an evening as beautiful as this is introduce myself. My name is Lynette Nduli. I am your class captain for the night, but I am led by a very capable president. I often jokingly call him Usihlalo. So to welcome us formally this evening, as well as to reflect on what we heard today and what we will continue to do this evening, is Mr. Thomas Tsepo Matlala. Please give him a round of applause.
I have said so often that it has to be within you to be a catalyst. You have to realize that sitting on the board of a company does not necessarily mean you're getting board fees only. You need to transform that company. But more than that, we need to create as many black-owned property companies as possible. We cannot cut the pie that is already there. It will get finished very soon. We need to increase the pie. A couple of things that the speaker said today, but the two that ring true to me, that I think we need to take as a challenge. First, it was the mayor saying they had a number of projects and they were busy doing these projects, but the projects are not working. Saying it's simply because government probably used different terms, but said the city and business were not working closer together. But he went further and he said it's because we're not working with SAIBPP. So I think what you probably didn't understand as a politician's speech is basically saying, as the city, we need to work with SAIBPP, and I'm relying on you to ensure that we make that a reality. There's a second thing that a number of people mentioned, used different words for that. And that was that we need to create our own institutions. We need to understand that we own our own with our government, as they say. But that if we don't grow the economy as the majority in this country, it is not sustainable. Your houses in Morningside and Houghton are not safe. We're not safe. So we need to ensure that the majority of the people benefit in the freedoms. And I think what the mayor actually said was, as much as it's important to vote, to be able to taste that freedom, you need to see the economic side of the freedom. Later on, you're going to be seeing a number of people that have done wonderful things, receiving awards. These awards are annually. So if you've done wonderful things and you're not receiving an award today, it does not necessarily mean that we don't acknowledge you. What you're saying is this is the start. We will be acknowledging you going forward. As SAIBPP, we've done well. There's one thing that I know for sure is that there is no company in the country, a property company that is not been touched by SAIBPP one way or the other. In fact, I dare say, of all the big corporations, at least the live companies, there is no one that does not have a SAIBPP member at an executive position. And that's a very good thing.
The acting head of the newly formed PTME within the Department of Public Works. This evening, he is standing in the place of the Minister of Public Works, the Honorable Mr. Thulas Nxesi. And I'm going to ask Mr. Govender to come to the stage at this time and give us a few words of encouragement from the Department of Public Works before we proceed onwards to our keynote address. Mr. Govender.
Good evening to the Program Director, Ms. Ntuli, President Matlala, my leader from the African National Congress, Comrade Gwen Ramakgopa. I am her ordinary member in Gauteng. To the Chairperson and CEO of the Property Sector Council, Portia Tau Sekati. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. My original brief was to stand in for the minister and read his speech. I'm not going to do that anymore. So let me just talk to you as Daya Govender and take up the challenge that was put by the program director of offering you a few words of encouragement. The encouragement that we would want to support is we are proud that SAIBPP exists and promotes the interest of black practitioners in the property sector. SAIBPP has played a significant role in trying to assist public works over a number of years. I have met Baba Gumede and others who for over many years tried to assist public works to turn itself around. Unfortunately, none of those efforts gained any traction. The current set of deployees that SAIBPP has, and it's a team of 9, hopefully have started a process with me as the head of turnaround and to finish the job that we've started. The primary one being creating the property management trading entity, and the second is turning public works itself around. President, what I can report to you, that your deployees have conducted themselves with distinction. The job they have in providing support and advice and assistance to us is not an easy one. It sometimes results in tears of frustration, but the challenge to turn public works around needs to be endured, and we need to finish what we've started. The challenge for SAIBPP and ourselves as Public Works is how do we use the portfolio of the state to create economic empowerment for our black people, bearing in mind there are only about 13% of black estate agents, that the black landlords who are providing property to us are minuscule in number, that the black companies and persons who are helping to develop property are limited. We have a portfolio that is significant. As I was explaining to the CEO of Pareto, we have over 33,000 land parcels, approximately 120,000 buildings, and we are only utilizing approximately 80,000 for state use. We have an investment stock of almost, once we've confirmed, in different categories, hopefully, that could be utilized by emerging black property developers, a significant stock, and a commitment to give preference to black property developers in respect of that investment stock, to give preference to black estate agents in respect of marketing and benefiting the state with income on the real estate side, creating opportunities for black companies in facilities management. I hope SAIBPP is going to rise to that challenge and help us and direct us to be fair, transparent, so that all black people can have a fair chance in getting those opportunities and moving away from the current practice or the recent past practice of Public Works of benefiting a few connected people. We as Public Works, President, do not deserve any award today, so I hope you've not reserved one for us. We have a lot to do. We have a lot to do. Maybe in about 5 years, you can decide whether we are worthy of an award if we have delivered the following. One, we've got a proper property management business established, that the PMT was not another pipe dream. The second is that we have created black entrepreneurs, hopefully a few millionaires. I don't know how many billionaires. But we must measure ourselves in 2019. How many new black companies have we created in the property industry? How many new jobs have we created? How many of the youth can say Public Works and SAIBPP gave them the best opportunities to help build our economy?
The audible voice of women within the property sector can certainly not be dulled. And what an honor and a privilege it is this evening to sit amongst women who have done such significant things within the property sector and will continue to lead this sector into the future. Our keynote address this evening will be delivered by the Deputy Provincial Secretary of the Gauteng Province within the ANC, Dr. Gwen Ramakgopa. Many of you will have known her as a previous Deputy Minister of Health, as a previous Deputy Chair of the ANC in the Gauteng region, as previously the Executive Mayor of Tshwane, and she has also worked extensively within the Gauteng's health department as an MEC in that particular area. A qualified medical doctor, but certainly a public servant who has had the opportunity to work in the priority sectors of our country, but more importantly, understand just what it takes to grow countries, to grow cities, and some of the issues that many of us grapple with here this evening. Please give a round of applause for Dr. Gwen Ramakgopa.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lynette Ntuli. for the warm introduction, and also for kickstarting this dinner, gala dinner, with wise words that have depth. And it really shows that you have prepared to usher us into this evening. It's not only the evening of celebrating, but it's also the evening of analyzing, assessing where we are and what we've achieved and where we still need to do more work. The president of SAIBPP, Mr. Thomas Matlala, the leadership of SAIBPP, representative of Minister Nxesi, Mr. Govender, the founding president, Ndate Sol Gumede, and other past presidents that are here. I think this organization has peace and growth in it. In many organizations, you wouldn't find people who have been past presidents still participating. But I think this organization is still going to reach greater heights because the wisdom, the institutional memory is there, and continuously those that come after, those that were before, they build on the foundations that have been started. The president of FAPCOS, Ndate Mxolisi, the CEO of the BBC, Mebabalwa Ngonyama, industry leaders that are here, invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. It indeed gives me great pleasure to have been invited to share some thoughts on the important matters pertaining to the transformation of the property industry in our country. There has been a dramatic expansion in the middle class in South Africa since 1994, and the largest share of this growth is amongst Black South Africans who changed consumption patterns as they entered the residential property market and spent on durable consumer goods. And this sentence is the statement is loaded. And it also says that we need to analyze this growth in Black middle class, this greater participation in property, in the property sector. And it also says that in terms of the residential property, we seem to have made inroads, but we still need to do more in commercial property. In South Africa particularly, amongst the Black middle class, this group has challenges with tertiary education, does not earn much, and is still semi-skilled and unskilled in terms of occupations. The few conveyancers and others that are in this industry that are having high skills are indeed a challenge. They're facing a challenge that they are still in the minority. More still need to be done. I trust you are aware that the commercial property industry market value, including that of government, is between 1.8 trillion and 2 trillion rands. Of this, a meager 1% or even less is owned by Black South Africans. This grim picture is made even more scarier by the fact that the government lease pie, valued around 3 billion rands per year, also sees less than 15% of this spend going to Black property owners. In short, figures accounting for Black representation in the massive 3 billion per year government lease market remains relatively low. I think Mr. Govender did say that Public Works does not as yet deserve an award. But I really believe that we must collectively take responsibility to hold hands with Public Works, be it at the national, provincial, as well as local level, so that come 5 or 10 years down the line, we can tell a different story. The attitude of financial institutions of demanding that a property developer needs a strong balance sheet for them to fund transactions has also not been helpful, since only a handful of Black people would have a strong balance sheet. In addition, the fact that a developer needs access to reasonably priced land, something next to impossible for black property developers, also contribute to the slow pace of transformation in the property industry. It is indeed a cruel reality that private land is expensive, hence strategically held land by municipal and provincial government has to be made available to black property developers for them to get a head start. We must make sure that the land that has been made available for development, that has been made available for transformation, remains within that space of transformation. And perhaps there must be entitlement somewhere in the contract so that we are also not disadvantaging our black entrepreneurs in the interim. Difficult, tough choices that we must look at together and resolve.
SAIBPP this year took a decision to present the Izitwalande Awards. These awards are conferred in honor and in recognition of outstanding individuals whose pioneering work and dedication has driven transformation within the South African property sector. You know, as we sat during the day and we read their various stories and their insights in the magazine that was in front of many of you during the day, one couldn't help but be reflective of the roads and of the journeys that each of them have traveled. And essentially, many of their stories are the great stories of this country. Thank you to each of our honorees. We're paying homage to you today for paving the way for us. To present our honorees this evening's awards, I would like to call on stage our keynote speaker, Dr. Gwen Ramagope, our president of SAIBPP, Mr. Tsepo Matlala, our vice president of SAIBPP, Ms. Nkuli Bohopa, as well as SAIBPP EXCO member, Felicia Sal. I would like the honorees to please bring their brightest smiles to the stage because there will certainly be a photo opportunity for them at this point. So could Khotso Matau please come up? Ms. Orena Kama, please can you make your way to stage? Mr. Maurice Mjolo, are you with us this evening, sir? Is he here? Well, he best make his way to stage to receive his award this evening. He is not here. Oh, it will be collected on his behalf. Thank you very much. Another lady, Miss Monica Kumalo. Are you here? Ah, and there she comes. Mr. Shadrach Mtetwa, please make your way to stage, sir. Miss Nyamega Matikizela, please join us on stage if you are with us this evening. Is she not with us? Oh, I'm reliably told that somebody will collect on her behalf. Mr. Marius Muller of our main sponsor, Perito, please make your way to the stage. To a past president of SAIBPP, Ms. Gaugelo Mamabulo. Mr. Sisangebulana is not here with us this evening, but is anybody from Billion Group or Rebosis? Thank you very much. Mr. Andy Tondi. Soli will collect it for him. Thank you very much. Ah, thank you very much. Another lady this evening and today who we spent discussing her and her work perhaps the most in transformation, Ms. Portia Tao Sekati. Please make your way to stage. Mr. Alex Pagati, are you with us this evening? He was here during the day, but he's not with us this evening. Will anybody be collecting his award on his behalf? Amelia? The floor nominates you to collect Alex's award on his behalf. Now, before I honor our Lifetime Achievement Award winners this evening, the executive of SAIBPP felt it would be remiss to leave our president off the list of pioneers this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, please join us in a warm round of applause as Mr. Tsepo Matlala receives his award.
I actually asked him if he was aware that he was going to honor himself. And I was not going to be part of it. But I've been assured by the ladies here on stage that it is a complete surprise. What an honor to lead people who trust you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the pioneers have led the way, particularly in the property industry over the last 20 years of our democracy. We've seen the doors they've opened, but before them are four gentlemen with us this evening who not only opened the door but paved the way. It is an extreme honor for SAIBPP this evening to award these Lifetime Achievement Awards to the following gentlemen. I will call them up one at a time so that we can appropriately celebrate them. Mr. Hatlan Tene. I think for these last four awards, please can we rise? It's appropriate for us to rise. We are here because they were. The next award recipients this evening in the Lifetime Achievements category, Mr. Hosaya Malekane. His award will be collected on his behalf. He is not here with us this evening. The next Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Mr. Lionel Kiston. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, to round up these all-important Isitwalande Awards, the final recipient of our Lifetime Achievement Award tonight, Mr. Saul Gumede. Papa Saul, the people have spoken, and in the spirit of Isitwalande, please can you close on behalf of all the recipients this evening?
I wonder why am I put in this position, but I would like to thank my first president, Andy Tondi, who's unfortunately not here today. I think without him and his vision, we wouldn't have achieved what we have achieved now. And all the work that has been done by the previous presidents that I introduced to you during the day when we were speaking, it is a collective I think it is a collective thing, it's not an individual thing, and no one person is greater than any organization. And I thank you all, the members, for having given us as presidents an opportunity to serve you. And we will continue to do that as long as you give us the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Congratulations to all our honorees this evening. Each of you in your individual capacities are so deserving of the recognition you have received tonight. Long may your light shine, protected as well as pursued by those who follow you. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to be the one who stands between you and your dinner this evening. So the main course will now be served. To everybody who allowed me to be Mother Christmas in November and collect your business cards. And as I stand up here this evening, I've got these lovely prizes in front of me. I've got a beautiful gift card from Santon in front of me. I've got another one from Eastgate. And I have this fantastic brand new iPad. So thank you very much to Santon City, to Eastgate, as well as to Material Property Services for these gifts this evening. To draw our lucky draw prize winner, Miss Felicia from the Airports Company, please join me on stage. I did indicate that I was not taking any favors as I took the cards, and therefore I'm making sure that my independence is guaranteed in this regard. I hope you didn't put your card in there. No. No cyber board members' cards are in the bowl. I know there are a few there that are there. Yes, there are. So you will take them. Yes. Siham Padayachi, are you still with us? Right. So with our first winner down, but guys, we've already proven that it's not about the weight of the card. Thank you very much. Mkuseli Tindlendi from Ultron. Are you here? Make your way to the front, sir. Congratulations. The winner of this prize had better have a membership that is up to date. How? A new member has won an iPad this evening. This new member owes me a pair of shoes. Her name is Miss Bongiwe Baleni. Congratulations to Miss Bongiwe Baleni on that. Thank you very much, Felicia, for your help. Thank you very much to our very generous sponsors. Thank you very much to the generous sponsors of our prizes this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, a momentous day draws to a close. We have a great many thank yous and a great many moments of gratitude as we celebrate the end of this day. And ladies and gentlemen, please rejoin me at the events just very briefly. We have a lot of gratitude to share tonight. And to deliver the SAIBPP vote of thanks this evening, I'm going to call on our Vice President, Ms. Nkuli Bohoba. and ask her to close this occasion for us. Please give her a round of applause. As Nkuli comes up, before she begins her votes of thanks, I am reliably advised that Ms. Matikizela, you have joined us this evening. Please come up on stage and receive your honor. Nyamega is a pioneer within our Izitwalande Awards this year from SAIBPP. Congratulations to you, Sisi.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a long day, a fruitful one, a productive one, and one with a very, very special ending. Please give me your time, as I would really, really like to take the time to thank the people that have helped to make this day possible. I understand some people may have already left. I will still mention them. Okay, so my job here is really a small one, but a very crucial one, which I find to be truly, truly humbling. We have a list of people that we would like to thank as SAIBPP, and first and foremost, the one who has just handed over to me, our MC for the night, Ms. Lynette Ntuli. Please, could you give her a round of applause for doing a sterling job. Siyabonga sisi. Thank you. Thanks. I have a long list, as I've mentioned, and I'm going to try to keep it very short because I'm not a very good speaker. But I have to start with my president, Mr. Tepo Thomas Matlala. We thank you. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for your insights. We thank you for your spirit. And without you, we couldn't have done this. Thank you so much. I will then go back to thanking all the SAIBPP past presidents. I mean, we have honored them tonight, and I won't be mentioning them one by one, but it is quite a privilege to be in an organization that has come this far, and all the presidents are, first of all, still alive, and they are still engaged and still dedicated to the cause, and above all, that they are in our midst. Thank you so much. Their dedication and contribution to the property sector doesn't go unnoticed. And I found a quote which I found to be very relevant for the job that they've done and for their vision. And you know, when they thought to come up with something like this. And it goes, what we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and the world remains and is immortal. So I hope they realize that their vision was actually far bigger than them, and it will live way beyond them. And they've made a huge contribution to the transformation of this country, and we'll forever be grateful. Thanks. Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa, we are grateful for her presence as she was here to represent Babu Paul Mashatile, who couldn't be with us. Thank you for, I think she's left already. Okay, that's fine. Mr. Daya Govender, we thank you very much, sir, for representing the Minister of Public Works and sharing with us his speech. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate that you could be with us until the end of our program. Please send our regards to the minister. We actually do have gifts for him as well that we'd like to send you home with, as well as a gift for yourself. Thank you so much, sir. Our sponsors of this event, we have a, okay, it's not there anymore, but we've had a holding slide all day in the conference. Yes, thank you. We've had it all day, and we really couldn't have done this without them. And I'd like to especially mention Pareto, that has walked this long road with us. Stanlib, they've sponsored the gifts that we gave away here today. Material sponsored the iPad that we just won. AXA, Wow. Thank you so much. Dijalo, Mahakabia Investments, Prime Media, Bro, Mergents, Aria, and Guma Resources. Thank you very much to our sponsors, and we ask that they never give up and that they never stop here, and that we continue to become partners into the future. The board members of SAIBPP, past and present, more so the present ones, because it's taken a lot to get us through this past year, and I hope you guys realize and appreciate what efforts have gone into the work that was done by the board members. These people are dedicated to SAIBPP as well as their day jobs, which are quite demanding on their own. They give off their time, they give off their commitment, they give off their efforts and energy, and we never really take the time to thank them and just stop and recognize. And yeah, I'd like to please give a round of applause for them. This includes and is not by any means that we are forgetting the people who are at the back office and make all these things possible, which is Hawa and Busi, who Tsepo already thanked earlier. I'd also like to thank all the speakers of the day who were on our program, some of whom are still with us. Mr. Marius Muller, Sol Gumede, Pax Tau, the mayor of the city. He's not here, but he was with us earlier. Amelia Bitti, Nomza Mokhatebe, Ipileng Mkari, and Prof. Samuel Azasu, as well as Olani Kubega and Keith Coates. Thank you for staying with us throughout our program. We appreciate it. It's been a long one. You know, you could have just come in, spoken, and walked away, but you've taken the time to be with us and walk this long road with us. We thank you. Our industry leaders, our honoraries, veterans, lifetime award achievers, everybody that's here as our wider membership, people who are doing the best they can in the industry, making the contribution that they do, and just being the example of the kind of leadership we like to see as we move forward as a continent. I'd like to thank you for your dedication to SAIBPP, for your membership, especially those who pay, and encourage those who don't to please do that. So we thank you for being here with us, and I'd like you to give a round of applause to yourselves, please. Thank you. The events coordinators, thank you. The media, the crew, entertainment, thank you very much. We are still going to be entertained for the night, so the night is still young. Please do not leave us. But I think just to recap on the day, a few points, because I know people have been here quite long, but as we look forward to the next 20 years maybe, you know, what is it that we would like to achieve? What is it that we'd like to see? And we've taken note of some of what came out of the talks today. Marius Muller, we've heard you on So What? And that is the theme of SAIBPP moving forward into the new year. We are where we are, we've done what we've done, what now? We've taken heed of that, and we are going to be moving in that direction. Mr. Kolani Kubega, you've set us on a challenge to say the camaraderie spirit still continues. We still have a lot to achieve. We appreciate that we've come this far, but there's yet still a lot to be done. We've heard you, and we are taking this on. We appreciate the words of encouragement from Mr. Dai Govender that he was relaying from the minister to continue and build on the good work and emphasis that the Department of Public Works wishes to encourage further relations with SAIBPP, and that as a department, you recognize us as a force and a body to be reckoned with, and you wish to work with us moving forward. It is our wish and it is our plan. So we will be seeing much more of you. Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa spoke of sustainable development and the greater African continent. I think this is very, very key because this is the time for Africa rising. This is the time for the greater mother continent, not just in the South African context. So we will be focusing, and we should all be focusing, on the story of Africa and how we penetrate those markets and how we move forward. That is where the future lies, in sustainable development as well as the rest of the continent's development. I think everybody concedes that it will take not only private sector working on its own or public sector working on its own, but a concerted effort from both industry players to make this possible, this change that we all want to see, that we may all work together and have a vision that is common and work together to realize the strategic vision that will move us to the next level. So I leave you on that very high note of so what?